Trigger warning. This episode may discuss one or more of the following topics: violence, death, including that of people of Indigenous descent, war, abuse, medical issues, self-harming behaviour, eating disorder behaviour or body shaming, drug and alcohol addiction, sexual activity, hate speech or strong abusive language, discrimination, and stereotypes. These potential topics have remained part of the episode as it forms part of the interviewee's story, which cannot be accurately told without including such information. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. G'day and welcome to another episode of Spectrum Uncensored. Today I have with me Hannah from the Northern Suburbs of Melbourne. Thank you for your time today and coming in and having a chat.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Did you want to tell me a little bit about yourself, what you're diagnosed with, when you were diagnosed, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I am officially diagnosed with ADHD. I haven't officially done my autism diagnosis because I spent all my money diagnosing my children. So it took a long time to come to terms with being able to even say I was autistic without the piece of paper. But I was talking to somebody about that. Like, I think it had been going on for a year where I just kept saying to people, I'm not diagnosed. And somebody asked me like why that was, why I'd said that. And I said, well, it's not official. And they asked me why I thought that was a problem. And I said, well, they haven't written it down for me. And the person said to me that the fact that I was fixating so much on the piece of paper probably meant I could let go of that problem.
Yep.
Which I thought was hilarious. And the more comfortable I've got with it, the more funny I find that observation. So yeah. I also have depression and anxiety in waves, although those things are sort of becoming easier for me over time as I move further from my point of diagnosis.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, that is a very ASD thing, isn't it? Like obsessing over that stuff. So you kind of answer your own question with that stuff. But and I think we just deep down know. But it is nice to have it solidified by that piece of paper. I definitely would agree with that. I was the same. Yeah. I was just like, I know,
I'll do it one day. Once I've recovered from all the spending on the kids, because it didn't end at obviously all the assessments and stuff. I think I'm not working at the moment because my kid, my son, my youngest, is going through school avoidance and school can't. So I haven't been working. So it slips further and further down the list of priorities financially getting that done. So yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. My son went through a lot of that as well. And he was home for a good solid 8 months. So, I had to throw everything in and just focus on him. So I can totally relate to that. And they're very important and we do what we can, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
But I think that it's nice when you end up diagnosed and your kid's already diagnosed, it's easier to relate to. Like, even though you could relate before, it's like a different level of relating because you've got that acknowledgement from it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. For me, it helped.
One of the things that I think has impacted my kids the most is from the very beginning that I always use the sentence like brains like ours, our brains, us, we, people that have brains like us. And even if I'm not talking specifically about autism or ADHD, which they are aware of, my kids are 6 and 8. They've known their diagnoses from the very beginning. There's a real sense of us. So it's not as isolating, I think. But I think that's part of the story.
I celebrated when I was diagnosed. My son was diagnosed first and then my husband was diagnosed and then I was diagnosed. So it kind of just, it was a snowball effect. We kind of just looked at each other and we're like, So it was
Which
a
is
celebration.
A lived experience, isn't it, for most of our generation, I think.
Definitely.
Is that's the order that a lot of us go through this diagnosis process on.
And it is a bit of a shame that we didn't, we weren't diagnosed as children, but at the same time, I guess it gives us a different perspective, really, where we've gone through it a bit differently to our kids and things. So I have gone through your Instagram a bit and I'm interested to talk about your hobby as well. I don't know, do you call it a hobby or do you call it
I'm looking, every time I start to feel a bit anxious, I look out the window and I can see my chickens down the back there and my rooster is on guard. It's very soothing to look at and look at them. But my hobby, cool. I would say it's definitely a special interest, wouldn't you? I don't know, but it's has a lot to do with my mental health.
Yep.
I am building my little urban farm. So I am the forgetful urban farmer. And
Yep.
for me, we moved from like Clifton Hill, which is in the inner northern suburbs of Melbourne, tiny little unit, and we bought this block and moved out here just before COVID hit. So we were here for about 3 months before COVID hit, and it's been like a case of regenerating some pretty feral land on our block, and my goal was always just to grow as much food as I can, and that has a lot to do with our sensory needs as a family. So my kids, from the very beginning, even when we were in a little space, I made sure that I was growing the things that they would eat vegetable wise, because my kids will eat from the garden quite large quantities of fresh, raw fruits and vegetables, whereas they will not eat them cooked into meals. And so part of our family culture has always been that they go foraging every day, they pick and eat, and then at come meal times, the only thing I really worry about is whether they're eating some protein. So it takes a lot of the stress out of food.
I love that. That's cool.
I think that's where the motivator came from, but it wasn't until after diagnosis that I really found that I could stay the course with the farming stuff, because obviously the dopamine comes and goes, and I have a lot of living things depending on me now.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. But when we moved here, that was before we had any diagnosis. My daughter was 4. I sort of noticed that there was stuff going on from a very early age. She was that classic, didn't sleep, but she hit all her milestones really early because she was go, go, go. The moment her brain was awake, she was ready to hit the world running. So she was wild. And after her diagnosis, the reasons became clear why my family was so resistant to her being diagnosed at all, because we are all neurodivergent in my family. So all of us, including my mother, have been diagnosed with ADHD, and now the autism diagnoses are slowly ticking through the population of my family. If Ari hadn't been so very intense, I just don't think I would have persisted. So we needed that level of intensity as a family to accept that it was worth looking into, because all my siblings, we are passionate and intense and intelligent, and we just don't quite fit in the general population. So it sort of made sense that that's where her journey was taking her as well. But yeah, so when we moved here, not long after that, about a year later, we got her first diagnosis, which was ADHD, which I now call the gateway diagnosis, because I feel like, in a way, it's more easily accepted, even though it's difficult for parents. I reckon people are far more comfortable with accepting the ADHD. And then when the autism comes in, it's like, oh, well, maybe it's all right. And her autism didn't really shine through until she was medicated. So once she was medicated for her ADHD, it's like, wow, yeah, hi, autism. How are you doing today? Because she was sitting still long enough for all those other behaviors to come forth. But yeah, if I didn't have the farm, if I wasn't able to just vanish out into the garden, I don't think I would survive all of the other demands on me. It's a real
we need that, like a thing for ourselves. And I found that, like, doing this podcast, this is my thing now. And I was very lost before. Like, I was stuck at home because of that whole, same as you. I wasn't sure if my son was going to survive the day at school or not. So, and losing that kind of identity of our work stuff, all of a sudden it was like, what do I do? And I mean, it's like that. It's that relationship between the autism and the ADHD. It's quite a complex relationship, and you find yourself not wanting to do stuff, but then wanting to do stuff, and then being bored, but then being overwhelmed because you're then doing something. And it's just like, absolutely, it's a journey every day.
I think like the thing I love about what I'm doing on the block, and I actually did a reel just a couple of days ago about this, is that growing annual food crops really injects the novelty into the special interest. So it keeps my ADHD in check because there's always like a new, weird, random thing that I can
That's
grow.
smart. Yeah.
And it just is a magic system. So, like, when I planted my little wheat field, my partner, who I call the Minister for Finance, he is responsible for keeping all my craziness in check, was so frustrated that I was planting the most ridiculous of food crops on our 650 square meter block. It just enrages him. And but what it does is, like, I'm never like that. I've got this tiny little thing planted. I might get a kilo of flour out of that crop, like maybe a kilo. It's absolutely ridiculous. But I would go outside and be like, ooh, how tall's the wheat? And I'd run out to see the wheat. And then all of a sudden, before I know it, I've weeded, I've mulched, I've gone out the back and I've pruned the fruit trees, and I've done like 6 hours of work on the farm that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't like just been lured out by the wheat, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm blessed, I reckon, in the relationship that I have. Lots and lots of challenges. We come from very different families of origin. Our parenting journey is fraught with conflict, as is the case with so many of us. And I think we struggle daily negotiating how we parent. But I don't have to cook. I don't cook. You know, does all the cooking, doesn't like going outside, So when I'm out in the garden and the kids are inside, there's somebody in here. So I sort of have so much more freedom to be out there without my children than I would have in any other dynamic, I think. So we're just such polar opposites that we can sort of cover all the different areas of life. So I have sensory sensitivities around heat. So once summer hits, you'll be damned if you find me outside in a Melbourne summer. But in winter, I'm in a t-shirt and shorts, you know, out there enjoying the weather. And and my partner doesn't like the cold. So is inside all of winter, and then come summer, I am not hanging clothes on that clothesline. It is too hot. So he's sent out to do that task and take the kids for walks and do all those things that I refuse to do in summer. So we're sort of that polar opposites, and it's very similar to, you know, those classic friendships, and I know I have many of them, of the ADHD autistic balance in the besties. So I see that in my relationship as well, that, you know, we're definitely not similar, but we work.
You complement each other really well by the sounds of it, which is nice because like you've kind of found your thing and your niche now and your happy place, which is really nice. And it, you know, it sounds like now I want to go and make my own little veggie patch. It just sounds like, because you've got it worked out. Like you make a good point, because we do get bored really easily. So it does help to have that. You know, you can then put, when the novelty wears off with tomatoes, you can then go to the next thing. And I really like that. That's really clever. Yeah. So
my dad passed away a long time ago, so he never got to live through this phase of our family finding out all these things about ourselves, which I think is really sad. I was talking to my sister about it the other day, and he was very ADHD. I think he was, we think he was dyslexic probably, but none of his stuff was diagnosed. And can't remember why I started saying that. Talking about the garden, whatevs.
It'll come back to you.
It'll come back, or it won't, and that's fine. You missed out on that little nugget. But garden, novelty, whatever. Systems. So he was just so intensely like insistent on systems, and now we know why. And I see those every time I sort of come up with a system that works on the farm. I think of him and I feel his like passion for systems, you know, in my bones, which I really like. Because it is about systems. But my motto on my Instagram, and I say it all the time, is just like plant stuff, kill stuff, learn stuff, repeat. Like, it's the only way. I killed so much stuff. But when those wins come, they are so sweet. Like, it's just so sweet. And doing this as a hobby and an outlet and a mental health exercise has taught me so much when it comes to my parenting and when it comes to accepting myself, because the failures will always lead to wins if I can just forgive myself, take a breath and start again. And I plant, like, we don't eat a lot of the stuff that I grow.
Yep.
Like, a lot of it ends up in the compost. I'm going to say it. Like, it does, and that's okay. It's just
But that's no different to...
the growing is what I enjoy.
Yeah.
And whatever, like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So I will grow every year. It's like, can you please plant less tomatoes, he says. And I'm like, absolutely not. I started more tomatoes than last year. And then I have a guy that lives up the street. I love him so much. He knocked on my door one day and just said, can I pick some of your tomatoes, please? I'm like, absolutely. He's like, there's so many. I'm like, absolutely. They're just rotting on the vine. So he came in and he just picked all my tomatoes and then dropped off a whole heap of avocados for me the next week from his avocado trees. And
that's cool.
Community, I found moving here was difficult. We'd been in the unit where we lived for about 6 years, 7 years. And it was the first time I'd started to build a community of my own. I'd always sort of, piggybacked off partners, best friends, friendship circles.
My husband does that.
And I was never able to build my own ones. Yeah. And I like that. And I understand now why that was. Moving from Clifton Hill, I didn't want to leave because I finally had started to build a bit of a community. Our parents group was there. And the feeling I had about the suburbs was that everything was going to be super isolated. And I realized how much I needed that connection to community. And then COVID hits, of course, and we've just moved into a new house and my kids aren't in a school or daycare and everything's like, crazy. But we discovered that the land in the backyard of our new house was foul. It had been completely contaminated. They'd bulldozed an extension to do units and then sold the project and we bought the block. So what had happened is they pulled the extension off and ploughed everything into the ground. So I had booked compost to be delivered 2 days after we moved in. Hello, hyperfocus. And I called up and cancelled that delivery because I wasn't going to be able to grow anything in the backyard. I was planning to dig a veggie patch like immediately. And so I had to pivot and I ended up putting all of the vegetable garden out the front. So I was digging and building garden beds in my front yard all the way through COVID. And within about 3 months had just built this community of friendships amongst neighbours and people that lived on the street because we're sort of on the way to a park, so a lot of people would walk past on their walks. And anyone who was interested in food growing at all would stop and talk to me. And some of my dearest friendships now were built during that period, and it was built around this passion and interest. And it was at a period in life where I was starting to be more authentic about who I was and letting myself be wild and ADHD and out and proud and not really sort of lock things away. So these are my first friendships that I've built that are completely authentic, and it's so freeing. So I started to get this sense of who I was and that I was valuable in friendships, even as myself, not just as who I'd learned to project. And I started to get a sense of soothing comfort, all in the midst of the maelstrom of like COVID and the anxiety of parenting sort of undiagnosed children, and finding myself like on the phone to my GP saying, I'm not okay. You need to medicate me until COVID's over. I'd always resisted medication, anxiety meds, for some crazy reason. I know now that I'm on them, I'm like, why would I not want that? It's amazing. But I'd resisted. It's like, oh, well, we can redo your mental health plan. I'm like, absolutely. But you also need to medicate me till COVID's over because I'm going to like strangle my children. I'm not okay. So there was that going on. And at the same time, this lifting up of this community building, it was just such an interesting, conflicting
I was going to say, like, being an isolated in time with COVID, it sounds like you kind of had this weird kind of up and down going on where you were isolated in the home environment, but you were finally feeling less isolated in a social way.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is interesting.
It sparked this like little seed of thought. And, I was thinking about my kids, and I was starting to experience what it's like to be socially safe. And I'd never had that experience before. And I grew up in a very religious family. So I grew up in the social construct of a church, right? My parents were missionaries, so it was overseas in like expatriate communities. So it was a very supported kind of network from the way life runs.
Yep.
And then I'm in this situation of isolation, raising these spicy children. And I'm thinking like, where is the church without God. Like, where is it? I need a church without God. I need that community because I know the impact it has being part of that kind of community. And at the same time, there's all this awareness building around ADHD and autism, and people are talking about it so much, and everyone's talking about the isolation and how the education system is slowly changing, but it's just not there yet, and we have to hold on and be patient. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be patient.
Yeah, that's not how this works.
I don't want to be patient. I can't. Like, I'm not going to survive if I'm patient. So then I sort of decided that it was time to actively build a social community for my children. Like that was how I was going to give them release from the pressure of school. It was how I was going to give them the sense that they had the freedom to make mistakes, impulsive mistakes, where other parents and families were kind and tolerant and patient and forgiving. And the only way I could do that was if I stopped keeping myself safe. I had to start learning how to say, "Can I be your friend?" and ask for people's phone numbers. So my goal was I launched into everything about making friendships in this wholly new location. And I led with, "We are autistic and ADHD." It was in almost every sentence I said to anybody that I met. And there's been some interesting conversations with other parents about the fact that I chose to do that. Parents have said to me, nobody knows, I haven't told anyone. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. That's not mine to tell. That's okay. And they say, "But you tell everyone." And my reply is, I want to shed the assholes as fast as I possibly could. Like, if they don't have time to love us wild and autistic and free, then we'll be okay without them, but I need them gone immediately. Like, I just don't have the energy. And so I slowly built this little cluster of families that make me feel safe, my kids feel safe, and it's built this sort of sense of community that I remember as an expatriate kid, like aunties and uncles that are not my aunties and uncles, but I didn't know that. And my kid has had play dates at other people's houses for the first time, and I don't feel worried about what's going to happen. We had somebody sleep over at our house the other night, and we were at Auntie Kate's place, and the kids were like, "Oh, can she stay over? Can she stay over?" I'm like, "Oh, look, maybe another time, and we haven't got ready for it yet." And has my sound cut out?
No, I can hear you still.
It feels weird. And the answer from my daughter was like, "Mum, ours is the house where insert child can stay over because we are all autistic." And I'm like, "Good point. You've got a point there, child." And that's really freeing. So I'm acutely aware that comes with the privilege of being able to create that. That's not something everybody has access to. So my next, because obviously I don't have enough on my plate.
We never do.
Never
Can't get enough
on my plate. Is now figuring out how to build a system like that is hyper local, where it can be replicated in small pockets, because we have yellow ladybugs, which is amazing to go to. We love yellow ladybugs. We go to yellow ladybugs. We really enjoy those social events, but these are all these little autistic girls coming from all these different places to this one spot, and then they all go home again. And what I've found is the value in having these parents that are safe locally and very close. And what happens is that when this other child doesn't want to go to, can't go to school, not doesn't want to, can't go to school. It's so hard to change my language around that. That I'm home, so she can come here, and her parent can go to work. Because when we do this as a community, it becomes easier. So that's my new hyper focus, is around figuring out how to build something that's replicatable. Off the back of people that may not have that same sort of social, same social privilege of being able to do that. So
it's almost like a neurodivergent matchmaking thing for families. I like that.
Well, when you think about services in communities, they don't just get given to anybody, right? The communities build those services for themselves. That's pretty consistently true. But we have this disadvantage of having extreme executive dysfunction and all the trauma in the world socially. And that really puts a spanner in the works when it comes to trying to set up these sort of things. So I don't know,
Yeah,
there's
well,
got to be a
you
way.
don't want to have to mask for the rest of your life. You just want to be
Mm.
able to let that wall down, and it is so freeing.
So freeing. Like, it's so
Yeah,
freeing.
we've
I
got the same
just,
situation. So
yeah.
all of our friends are on the spectrum somewhere,
Mm,
whether it's
mm,
ADHD or autistic, and
yeah.
then, but we've all self-discovered together.
Mm-hmm,
Like we all
mm-hmm,
undiagnosed, and then one's gotten diagnosed, and
yeah.
then the other one's gone, maybe it's like definitely, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Oh
next
yeah,
minute
yeah,
everyone's
definitely. That was it,
diagnosed.
right? Yeah, yeah. My
Yeah.
friend, because I was sort of looking at autism. I had my awareness of autism because I was in an online parents group at the very beginning when I had Ari, and one of the other mums posted a list of autistic traits in women, and I was like, stop it. Like, what is that? And
I
I'm
got
like, tick, tick,
100% on
tick,
a
tick, tick,
test.
tick, tick. So, yeah. So I go back to my partner. I'm like, I think I'm autistic. And the answer was, you're not autistic. Interestingly enough, his next statement was, I have a lot of autistic friends, he says. I wonder why that is. I wonder what, I wonder. But it's
No
okay.
idea.
We're still saying he's neurotypical, so it's all right. We're
Okay.
going with it. Yeah, you're not autistic. I have a lot of autistic friends, but of course, all his autistic friends were men. And so that was the first stage of the pushback on maybe
Yes.
my daughter's autistic, maybe my daughter's autistic. And so I had her on all these wait lists. But while we were on the wait list for things, a very good friend of mine was diagnosed with ADHD. And I'd completely forgotten this story, by the way. They were at my house, and I remember saying, I can't remember, like, how did I find out that I thought I might have ADHD? And she's like, I told you. So she came over and said to me, like, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD, and I think you might have ADHD. And that child over there, the one that's like upside down, in a chair, like waving her legs, definitely has ADHD. Ping, 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 like across the
Yeah,
room.
we do that
And
all the time.
we sort of flipped from maybe she's got autism to, as soon as the pediatrician appointment came up, ADHD. And then I forgot about the autism for quite a while. And it wasn't until like 6 to 8 months later that the ped was like, yeah, I can see the autism there. I think it's worth an assessment. Yeah, that's a story a lot of us go through, isn't it? Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
100%. And I think
yeah,
like I have this shirt that says "Keep talking, I'm diagnosing you" because like every time I meet
yes.
someone, I'm like,
Mm,
"You're one of
well,
us."
yeah, yeah. Well, every time my partner does something that's a bit autistic, I say, "Oh, I wonder what that is. That might be the autism." And his response is, "You've got a hammer, and everything looks like a nail to you." Like,
No,
because
we
it
just know.
is a nail. It is a nail. Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. I like it. I wouldn't change it for the world.
But it's lovely to be surrounded by like-minded people or people that
Mm-hmm.
just get it, because you get enough judgment as it is. And I mean, my
Yeah.
he's autistic and ADHD, but he's also nonverbal, so it's got that little added extra element of complexity to it. And that has always been a big fear for us. Like, he's going to be very misunderstood just because he can't
Mm,
communicate in a
mm,
traditional manner. But we're the same. We've got a whole bunch of friends now that are just like adopted aunties and uncles, and yeah, as time's gone by, everyone's slowly getting diagnosed. My now best friend, she was diagnosed after me because we were talking, and we're like, yeah, we're totally both. And
mm.
um, her kids weren't diagnosed when I met her, but when she found out about it, my son, she started to kind of question things and was like, "Do you think?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then a couple of months later, "What about my daughter?" "Yeah." So sure enough, they're
Yeah,
all diagnosed now. So
yeah.
yeah, it is, and it's nice because you start talking to people, and then you're actually able to help people. Because I always say, try to be the
Mm,
person that you needed at the beginning for
mm-hmm.
others, because it can be a very lonely time, and it's not through any fault of your own. It's just that there's not enough support and
Oh, absolutely.
understanding.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody just this morning about this, and this, he said, my now best friend, like, I realize I've collected these and they're all my best friends. Like, I have these like
Yep.
intense best friendships. But Kate, who is my children's new like adopted auntie, I hadn't known her for very long. I was going through the school avoidance, and I had a really triggering and stressful meeting with the school. I'd been in tears, and I was just like so dysregulated and upset. And I messaged her, and she was homesick. And this makes me laugh so much. Honestly, I don't think we'd known each other for more than a few months. And I said, can I come over and have a cuppa? I'm feeling pretty stressed. And she's like, absolutely, but I'm in bed in the study watching TV. I'm like, that's okay. I'll just get into bed with you. And I did. I just climbed in, we just lay there and we talked for about half an hour, and like I felt myself de-escalate and I was getting regulated and everything. And then all of a sudden the study door opens and the husband pokes his head through. He's like, can you figure out like who was in bed with you? Like I heard the Uber Eats guy come, and Kate said, that was like half an hour ago. You weren't worried that like for half an hour? But like what I love is like that the safety in these kind of friendships where people are all sort of neurodivergent, of being able to move like that's pretty intense. Like I'm pretty sure like neurotypical people would freak out if somebody just wanted to climb into bed to regulate.
Yeah.
And look, there'd be lots of spicy people that would freak out as well. I'm not saying they wouldn't, but like I'm finding these kindred spirits, and I wouldn't have survived the process of the school avoidance and advocating in a school system that is responsible for so much of my trauma without her. Right. And I have her because at a birthday party last year, I just said, she asked where my child was. I'm like, oh, my one's that one all the way over the other side of the swimming pool by herself, lying in the sunshine, just warming up and having nothing to do with the party. And I'm like, oh, she's autistic. And, we're going through diagnosis. And there we go.
Yep.
Right. So the finding those authentic people, and I've gone off track again. I know that I can feel it because I can't remember what you were saying that sort of prompted me to tell that story, but it's a good one anyway. So whatevs. Yeah,
it's a choose your own adventure. So
it is. It really is. Yeah. I keep thinking about, and the reason I keep getting distracted is because my brain is thinking about the last question just over and over and over and over again. I just keep fixating on it. So
let's go with the last question then. Let's get it done.
Buckle up.
So,
I've been making a list.
if someone suspects that they are on the spectrum or their child's on the spectrum but isn't diagnosed, what would you say to them as an advice?
Yeah. Contextually, before I answer that, can you tell I've been thinking about it? Why have I been so distracted through this whole discussion? Contextually, we all know, well, those of us that have been sort of navigating it for a while know that the system is under strain. It's very difficult to get professional help. It's very difficult to get assessment and medication for ADHD for both adults and children. Navigating diagnosis and assessment for autism takes a long time. You've got to wait for your pediatrician wait list, and then you've got to wait for your psychologist. It takes a really long time. So
it really does.
Don't be discouraged. We can't control the world as much as we try to control the world. Retrospectively, what I wish I'd done when I first suspected was start working on my trauma. Because what I've realized, and I'm about to cry, is that I managed to traumatize my kids pretty significantly for the first few years, because the roadmap to my parenting was just riddled with control, anger, anxiety, frustration, and I didn't know how to regulate. I didn't know how to validate and support them through regulation. I couldn't do any of that stuff, and I didn't know to try, and I think that's a big problem. So I would say, like, it doesn't matter how good you feel, there's trauma. You can't go through your life undiagnosed and not be traumatized in some way, shape or form. And the chances are, we talked about like all the possible trigger warnings earlier that happen to those of us that are undiagnosed. The chances are that a lot of those things have happened to you as well. And so I would say to parents, like, start working on your trauma, because you might not be able to find a professional, but there are things you can do. And look, I'm really lucky. The reason I've been able to, and again, this is privilege, the reason I've been able to, I reckon, process so much of my trauma and get so much better at regulating is because my sister's special interest is trauma. and communication and therapy. Like, the woman is obsessed. She's amazing. And when COVID hit, we started spending a lot of time on FaceTime together. She lives on the other side of the world. My sister is I am Sarah Sproul on Instagram. She's phenomenal. So if you don't follow her, you should. We started like just FaceTiming 4 to 6 hours a day throughout COVID, and she would sit on my window ledge and I would sit somewhere in her house, and we would just go about our business with us in the background and one AirPod in. So I've had about 40 hours a week of therapy, free therapy from my sister since 2020.
Sounds like I need to interview her.
Oh, you do? Well, she's actively unmasking at the moment, which is really interesting. We were talking yesterday about how exhausting that is. So we have these really amazing, intense, like neurodivergent conversations where we dive deep into all of the things. But the most impactful ones of trauma, like healing for me, have been the Safe and Sound protocol. I don't know if you've come across that.
No.
Find someone who knows about it and interview them, because it's phenomenal for autistic brains. It can retrain like the way your ears hear safe sounds, so that like we're not triggered so much. And you don't have to actually know what your trauma is or talk about it or figure it out or work through it at all. It feels like voodoo. It's some kind of weird cheat. And can be quite like
life hack.
It's amazing. It can be quite expensive. So of course, because that's her special interest, she just went and learned how to deliver Safe and Sound so she could put us all through it, which is hilarious. And the next one was recently she's been working on internal family systems, which is all the rage at the moment as well in therapies. But I had ineptly sort of dipped my toe into some of the internal family systems things with my son and his school avoidance, and it was magical, amazing. But it's all under the umbrella of healing trauma, because now that my trauma is healing, I'm able to sit with my kids in dysregulation and not feel like I need to punish them, make them stop, negotiate like to get it away from me. I can manage my own sound sensitivities better. I feel like I was in arrested development and I didn't know it, and I've been able to complete the maturation process into adulthood, because what I can see at the beginning was a whole heap of trauma, like riddled narcissism, I would say, honestly. And at the other end is like coming out and stepping into an adult role in my family and for my children. And I don't think without healing the trauma that's possible. So whilst waiting for access to all of these things.
Yes, I mean, it sounds like, to put it like in a basic sense, of make sure you help yourself before you can help others, or, you know, in this case, your children, because if you can't, I've used it a couple of times now, the whole, you know, putting the mask on when the plane's going down, put it on yourself before you help other people, because if you're, you know, passed out, you can't help anyone.
And find someone you can climb into bed with and cry. Just, it's gold.
Even if it's an Uber Eats guy.
You're a gem. You're a gem. Yeah. It's like, order some food. Dude, can I just have a cry and a cuddle? Would that be all right?
I'll give you 5 stars.
I'll tip you. Oh, God.
Oh, dear.
What would we do? I don't know. But yeah, community building, I just made such a difference. My chickens are beautiful. My rooster is just like the most gorgeous thing in the world. He's amazing. His name's Chirp.
He's calling you.
He is. I haven't had any complaints yet, but I'm bribing every neighbour like within about a 2-house like distance with eggs and honey to hope that nobody complains, and giving them all like this sob story about how the cats kept killing my chickens and Chirp's keeping them safe, and it's okay if he's driving you crazy, we'll eat him and then no one will complain.
He's your emotional support rooster, so they just can't do anything about it.
He is.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time out today and chat to me. It was amazing to actually have a proper chat, and I feel very grateful to have had the conversation.
I'm stoked
with you.
We did it so quickly, because I would have been super anxious if I had to like wait.
Yeah,
so we just get it done.
Pretty much, get it done. But I definitely, I definitely appreciate you coming and having a chat. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. That was really lovely.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.